All right, we got probably like the most special of special episodes we've done in a while. We've got a meeting of the minds here. I've got Chris back. We're in person, and we got Eli on the show. And we're not only doing it about just any old show, right? Eli's been on. We've talked about a couple different shows on this podcast before. We did Ozark. We did Wheel of Time. Eli, as far as I'm concerned, those are chump change. That's chump change compared to what we're about to do today, because we're about to cover a show that Chris and I have been into since 2018. It's hard to believe that the show premiered 4 years ago. It's a show that I got Eli, who has quickly proven himself to be one of the best TV connoisseurs I think I've known, like just in person in general. Not only that, but this is a show that has slowly been building up. And now I think after this past season, this might be the best show on air. Like, as far as I'm concerned, all of the TV for the rest of the year could pack it in and go home, because we are here to talk about season 3 of Barry. A lot of people have been talking about it recently just because of how gangbusters this most recent season was. And I mean, gentlemen, like, let's not bullshit any further. Let's just get into this.
Let's do it. See you guys on the other side.
All right, people, it's Sunday morning. We're back with another episode of the Talkin podcast. I'm here. Chris is here. Eli's here. We're here to talk everything Barry season 3. And I know, guys, that we usually start these conversations off by just talking about, how do we get into the show, all that. But before we get it started, Chris, I just wanted you to give a shout out to our listeners. You're back. I mean, like, just give the listeners a warm welcome,
Well, it's good to be back. I certainly missed the show. We have a lot planned. In fact, after this episode, a little inside baseball, Dom and I are going to go for a walk and cook up a bunch of awesome ideas for you guys for the rest of the summer into the fall and the end of the year. So what more can I say? Just, you guys know where to find us. You come back week to week. Thank you so much, and I'm glad to be back.
100%. Eli, you obviously came through clutch in order to help me out with the Wheel of Time podcast back in November, and we've just been having so much fun with all the different TV and movie stuff that we've been covering the last couple of years. You famously also hopped on to help me rank all the Marvel stuff that dropped last year. So I wanted to kick this conversation off with you, Eli, because I think you're the most recent one. I've been watching the show since 2018. Chris got into it a little bit after me, but you were the most recent one. So when did you start watching Barry? Remind me again. It was only like a month, like maybe like a week or two after the 3rd season premiered, right?
Yeah, when I started watching, I believe there were 2 or 3 episodes into the 3rd season.
Right, and it was one of those shows that, like, once, like Succession, where once you got into it, you're just like, you can't stop. You just got to keep watching over and over and over again. So, like, break that down. Like, what was your thoughts, like, going into Barry? Did you know really what it was going to be? And, like, how has that evolved to, like, where it is now as far as, like, how good the show is?
I don't know. It's really interesting because I think it was you who recommended it to me. But just I thought, like, just such a simple premise, just like a hitman trying to quit his job and become an actor. Like, okay, that actually is enough to pique my interest. And honestly, after watching it, I just feel like this show had no right to be as good as it actually was. I mean, I was like actually blown away by how like immersed I was in the actual show. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, what's even crazier is that it's like, so, I mean, Bill Hader and Alec Berg have talked on a lot of different areas. First of all, the fact that Bill Hader kind of pulled Alec Berg right off Silicon Valley, which kind of nosedived a little bit in his last couple seasons to come up with this show. Not to mention the fact that it's like you said, the premise could not have been simpler. Bill Hader was just like, yeah, what if you just had like another assassin, but instead of like focusing on all the crime elements, instead we just like focus on him becoming an actor. And then how they've slowly been able to evolve that show to where it is now, to a point where it's like, I don't even know if you could argue that this show is a comedy anymore, other than because the only thing that still has it going for that is the fact that it still fits tightly into like that 30-minute time slot, because just this show is it without spoiling anything yet before we get into the main conversation, is just doing so many things that it feels like I'm like, yeah, I want this to be in everything that I watch, is what this show is doing as far as just how daring, how experimental, and just how bold it is as far as what's going for. But Chris, break down your relationship, because I know we've talked and we've nerded out a lot about Barry, but like, I don't think I actually know when you started watching and getting into the show. So break that down, what you thought going in when you first started watching the show to where it has come now.
Yeah, I pretty much watched it immediately after that first season concluded. I know you were very over the moon about it. And in our little, I've spoken about it a bunch. We all, when Dom lived in the area still, would go catch a movie and we'd hang out before and after the movie and just chat. And that show just kept coming up. And like Eli said, the premise piqued my interest immediately. Hitman wants to become an actor. Yeah, all right, sign me up. That sounds really funny. And like, I love Bill Hader. Superbad is probably my favorite comedy film of all time. So I already have such a slanted bias because I just think he's so amazing in the few scenes you get him in that film. I think Alec Berg. I was so angry about the downfall of
Trust
Silicon
me,
Valley
the less said about Silicon Valley those last 2 seasons, the better.
until I got into Barry and realized, like, okay, all good things must come to an end, right? And as much as I hate to say it, because Dom knows, I love Silicon
Oh,
Valley.
I do.
That show fucks, but
It
I will...
did. Past tense. Past tense.
But this show is, I think, the perfect amount of modernism without the pretentious nature that Hollywood always seems to shove down your throat. Where it's like, I feel like nowadays, whenever someone's trying something different and new, they just have to like scream it off the rooftops and let you know. And real art speaks for itself. And that's why I think I love Barry more so than anything at the end of the day.
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me, because like, not in order to like echo anything that you guys just said, but at the risk of sounding repetitive, the biggest thing for me, it wasn't even just the premise of the fact that I love Bill Hader. I'm like, okay, Bill Hader. I'm like, this show just, I'm like, I remember when the first trailer came out, like back in 2018. I'm like, wow, that was at a time where like I was really getting into like experimental TV and all that. Like Atlanta's second season was like right about to premiere at the same time, back when Atlanta was still good. I think Ozark and Glow would like just premiere like a couple months ago. We were really entering into like this new phase of, it's like, okay, now that streaming is like kind of established itself after the last couple of years, that was also when Game of Thrones 6th season was on. I'm like, okay, now we're starting to really see what these streamers are really capable of as far as like the types of stories that they can tell, the different types of risks and kind of bold areas they were going to go to. And this is just the latest example where I'm like, this sounds so weird and different and interesting. I don't really know what it's going to be, but I love Bill Hader. I really loved him in everything that I'd seen him in. And the thing that set it apart was Bill Hader was always one of those actors where it's like, I know he's a comedy guy, but I feel like of all the comedy guys that came up like kind of through the Judd Apatow troupe of comedy acting, the Seth Rogans, the Jonah Hills, the James Francos, RIP as far as him being canceled, all Jason Segel, all those guys that came up through the Judd Apatow. There was always something about Bill Hader that just felt a little bit more like straight-laced, but also felt like a little bit more darker. And it makes sense when you like understand his background, like how he kind of came from Arkansas to LA and how he worked his way up. Like he was a PA for years throughout the 90s before he landed SNL. Like he was a working guy in Hollywood. So like he already didn't have like a necessarily like a comedy origin. Like you could tell he was always into films. Like he loves movies like Taxi Driver, like No Country for Old Men. He's a huge fan of the Coen brothers, and those allusions are all over the show. And so you can imagine my surprise when I see this show. I'm like, okay, I really like Bill Hader, but I don't necessarily know like what this is going to be. And I think the thing that hooked me was the fact that I'm like, this is simultaneously the funniest show that I might have ever seen. I'm like, the humor, at least in that first season, is on point. Like every single joke they land, I'm like, this shouldn't work at all. But somehow they're making it work. Like the mix between like the acting school with Henry Winkler and Sarah Goldberg, and then like the crime world with Anthony Carrigan and the Chechens and everything. And that would have been just one thing. Like that first season versus how they were able to blend like kind of the dark nature with the with the comedy. That would have been one thing. But it's as the show keeps going on and it keeps getting funnier, but it keeps getting darker. Like I think that's one of the reasons why it helped that Barry and Succession came out so close together, because it's like the thing that I think kind of ties both those shows together so well and makes them hit so well for the modern audience is because for the longest time, right, we were coming off the decade of the anti-hero, the Tony Sopranos, the Walter Whites, all that stuff going on, And the whole thing about it is it's like, okay, we love those guys and they were anti-heroes, right? They still had like a justifiable reason for doing all the stuff that they did. But now we're in this kind of new era where now we're not necessarily covering guys who have like kind of that justifiable reason. We're just following like terrible people, like just people who maybe not necessarily are trying necessarily to be malicious, but they just kind of can't help themselves. And it's seeing like how they kind of play around with that just continues to make this story so interesting going forward, Like, so that's kind of the biggest thing for me that really, really suckered me in as far as the potential of this show. Because the other thing is this show is one that has so many different areas to become cliche. This says there are so many different routes where a different TV show and a less daring TV show would have just become so stale, so boring, gone for the easy thing. But this show just never, ever does. And that brings us to this third season where, again, this is another show. Eli, you and I have talked about this. Chris, you and I have talked about this, where, again, 2022 is the gift that keeps on giving as far as television goes, because we're getting all these shows back after between a 2, sometimes 3-year wait, sometimes even 4-year wait, with these shows. Ozark, Atlanta, Succession, Barry, Better Call Saul, The Boys just came back after 2 years, all these different shows that we're getting, not to mention the sequels to the litany of new shows that we got in the beginning of this year. And you can imagine my surprise when, really shouldn't, but after 3 years, not only does Barry come back, it's better than ever, it's stronger than, it picks up right where the last season left off and is somehow stronger than ever, but it manages to elevate the story to a new level where I'm like, not only do I not think I'm watching a comedy anymore, I think that this is just like, forget TV, this is one of those where I'm like, this might be the best thing I've seen all year. And that's kind of where I want to kick the conversation off as far as that goes. So, Eli, I want to start with you this season in general. Just like, give us your general thoughts before you get into some of the specifics of it, like where you started, when you started watching the first episode of this season, just that opening scene, which is like just, well, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it just as far as how it goes to where it ends. Like, man.
I don't even know where to begin, to be honest. Just like I said, when I first started up the show, I pretty much binged through it in like 4 days. So I was lucky. I got to kind of see most of it up until I think it was like episode 4 when they were releasing them on a weekly basis. But man, just watching all that in just a short amount of time, it like just still didn't even feel like enough. Oh my gosh, I'm over the moon, and just I don't even know what I like the most about this show. It's just a blend of so many things. The acting, I will say, even though obviously it's kind of I would say leaning towards being a comedy, but the acting I just think is absolutely phenomenal. So especially in this last season, some of the monologues we've seen from like characters like Bill Hader, like Barry and Sally, and just oh my gosh, I just like top tier acting. Some of the best I've seen like all year, probably in the last few years, to be honest.
Yeah. Chris, it took you a little bit longer to get to this season, but once you finally got to it, like walk me through it. Like, was it like no time had passed and everything, or were you like, oh my God, like this is entering a new level?
Well, with season 1 and 2, I rewatched them going into this, so that's kind of what took a little while. I wanted to really experience this the right way, make sure everything was like bulletproof as in regards to like my Barry lore. And as I was watching those, I was like, okay, I remember exactly why I got hooked instantly with season 1. And then I was like, okay, this is the perfect sophomore outing because we just took everything I loved about season 1 and we got more comfortable with being ourselves. Which, when I say that, an off-kilter show that's not afraid to say what it wants to say and really takes no prisoners, which is the best part about, I think, this show. And as it grows, you can clearly see that going into season 3 because Eli speaks about the performances incredibly top tier across the board. I mean, I don't have, I think, a favorite performer because, yes, while Bill Hader arguably gets the most screen time, his co-stars are everyone's so perfectly well written, firing on all cylinders. And I think if I had to pick one thing that resonates with me the most about this show, I think it's just the true expressionism that shines through. Not being afraid to poke fun at the Hollywood system that they obviously love. I mean, there's a reason, like you said, Bill Hader worked his butt off to be a PA to then become one of like the biggest comedy stars in the industry. He had so many hopeless hours and days, I'm sure, when he was a PA on set, like, will this ever work? And so it feels real when he's taking a shot at them. When Sally's talking in that video where she apologizes, but she doesn't really apologize because, hey, her abuse was stolen from her and then was being monetized. And that is such an exploitative process that probably does happen often in Hollywood. I mean, bit of a different example, but look at how the zeitgeist originally portrayed Amber Heard to what we know about her now, right? She was up here, now the truth comes out and she's down here, but the whole time everyone was just believing her because of her word up there. And I know I felt Sally in that. I really looked at Johnny Depp and I felt Sally and I was like, damn, like someone had to say this, and what a poignant time for this to be said. And so the realism, Bill Hader just going through it emotionally, suffering because he has no one to talk to. He's lost everyone to trust, but knowing that he still wants to be a good person, but having no one to help him become a good person. And he's just so completely distraught, like leaning into all this, like the emotion, like the struggle, the torment, but also like, I think the biggest thing this show does is it leans into like too much of the gruesome nature of like bad people exist and they probably somewhat act like this. And sorry if this is like, you're too sensitive for this, but this is how it would happen. And I think the realism as well is it's wild. Like there is some funny moments, like the scene where the dogs are running and running and running and that little breakup scene. And you need that to cut the tension in a show like this because it's just too real. Like Barry's suffering, I almost feel like I'm watching like someone I know, and I hate that, but I love it. And that's what this show I think does the best. It's not afraid to be itself, and it's genuine. Like I said earlier, it's not just like trying to be different for being different's sake, which we just see so much all the time now. It's truly, I feel this is Bill Hader just pouring his heart and soul into every script.
I
So
think the biggest thing for me, if we're talking specifically about this season in general, that really set it apart from that opening scene onward is it's like that opening scene, the way it portrays it as far as like kind of getting across that theme of forgiveness. It's like you can just tell that like I'm like, oh, this is a different Barry. Like Barry was always kind of like in that alone, isolated place and everything. But the thing that was so interesting about watching those first 2 seasons is you were really watching him like genuinely try to change his outlook in life and try to be a better person. And what's been so fascinating about this show, kind of watching it through here, is understanding that it's not necessarily saying that he's incapable of it, but it's also doing that really, really tricky thing that I think even shows like The Sopranos and Breaking Bad didn't necessarily, not that they didn't try to do this, but kind of had a little bit of a hard time with, it's basically saying, okay, you may think that you're doing this, but the fact that it's portraying it from all different sides is presenting a really three-dimensional and really morally gray outlet as far as like, okay, actions have consequences. All of this is going to come back around. And not to mention the fact that he is now kind of infecting his other people around him without even realizing, and it's just like kind of all of those different like real interactions. Your point about like how real the show is, that to me is the most winning element, because this show is constantly, it is not those show that is trying to go for the laugh and trying to go for the dark moment. It's a show that is trying to show we're all human beings. We're all a little messed up inside, whether we're the worst hitman or whether we're, the most depraved, like former actor or acting coach, whatever, we all have that little damaged piece inside of ourselves that we're all trying to gain validation for, and I think how it presents that theme of forgiveness, but also shows like, how we think we achieve forgiveness versus what that actually means and what that actually takes. I think that the levels that they go to as far as how they portray that, I think is just one of the few things that elevates this season above all else. Before we even get into the specifics as far as like how they bring all those kind of all those kind of overhanging themes that we're still hanging around from the first season, how they even get a little bit existential with those last couple episodes as far as like, okay, like when he's in that weird limbo place at the end, like, and like all of the different moments show here is that I'm like, okay, this is what they've trying to build. This is what they have been trying to build through this entire time, where this is a character that wants to be forgiven so badly that he doesn't he doesn't realize that through all of his actions, he's only making things worse, to the point where it ends, you don't want to see that ending happen, but you realize in like from like a logistical sense that it's like there's no other way this could have gone. There's absolutely like if this season had ended any other way, you're like something would have felt inherently unfulfilled.
exactly. I mean, they're not. It's like when the writers of Lost went to Dominic Monaghan and they said, "Hey, listen, we love having you around. You're a great energy on set. We can keep you alive, but we do also have the perfect exit point for you that will just heighten the show and make this finale arguably the biggest of the show." And Monaghan said, "Listen, whatever the part needs, I'll play it. Don't limit creativity for me or for fan service." And I think that's exactly what Barry's doing. Barry is playing it true to what I think would naturally happen in that writer's room. And I love that they have a writer's room in this show because they highlight the fakeness of Hollywood and how thinly, like, that algorithm that determines if the show if the show's going to get picked up or not. I loved everything about that. I do have some gripes with this season and the separation of characters, which we'll get into a little later. But while we're singing its praises, I do have to compliment it for being fearless. This show does what so many people say they're going to do when they pick up the pen to write a script. But we know there's nothing daring or bold about a Marvel movie, right? I mean, sure, maybe they did a double, like, maybe they had like 2 green screens next to one another and you couldn't tell that there was a separation between the two. Oh, bold, fearless. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that's about it. Like, I think this show is true creative talent and passion on full display. But I don't know, Eli, man, it's what's your take on while we're in the glorifying this show for rightfully so, because I think it deserves it. Where's your head at with all this?
I mean, I completely agree with everything you guys have been saying. It's just I love when shows do like the whole like gray area, like, complex characters and relationships. It's just like where you never really know like who's really doing the right thing. And it's just I love how they make, our protagonist like a really like just messed up and at times like really evil dude, and then we kind of have our antagonist, NoHo Hank, kind of being the most wholesome character in the entire show, pretty much. And he's just the nicest guy, and I just love how they created that parallel like that.
I love Hank.
Hank's the low-key MVP of this show. Like, I mean, Anthony, I'm
100%.
coming into this show, Anthony Carrigan was kind of like the scene stealer from season 1. Every time you get a new show, you always get that one character that you're like, yeah, the rest of these characters are good, but who is that guy? And I want to find out more about it. I know how Hank, just from the way he looks to his mannerisms, the way he carries himself, he's so different from any other traditionalist mobster, and his arc kind of throughout the entirety of the thing. And then when he kind of like, in a strange way, of all the people who kind of lost at the end of the season, this season ends with a lot of people losing. Barry loses, Gene to some extent loses, even though he does get the justice. Sally loses, Fuches loses, he's in jail. I feel like Hank is the only one that got a victory out of all of them, and it just feels so wholesome. And you're like, wait a minute, wasn't this guy introduced as like one of the violent mobsters at the beginning of the show? Like, what's going on here? And that's just the magic of this show as far as what this show is capable of. Now, Eli, if I were to tell you that almost every single sequence that we had, like in Hollywood, like with Sally, like from the inception of her show all the way through to the end, like when her show gets canceled, like if I were to tell you that almost all that stuff is almost entirely based on real life, and that specifically that award circuit where she's going like the awards junket and answering all those questions, they're asking her all this different stuff, and they're like, oh, who do you think should play Spider-Man? And she's like, oh, Ben Mendelsohn. I don't know, which I think is hilarious because Ben Mendelsohn is already in a Star Wars movie. Like, how much of that would you believe in, like, was based off of true, like, actual things that happened?
Oh, I believe that all of it, if not, very, like, pretty much. I mean, it's just like, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
It's probably all real. It's not in some way, shape, or form. Even if the writers weren't basing it off of experiences they've had, I'm sure they happened in some kind of way very similar to what we've seen. I just think it's hilarious. It's kind of like I kind of draw parallel to like Tiger King, where sometimes real life can just be the craziest thing compared to fiction.
Yeah, it's really. I think this season too. That's another kind of unsung, really good part about it is the fact that this season, I think more than the first two even, is like, yeah, the truth really is stranger than fiction. Where you're like, we were watching that ridiculous motorcycle chase that ended episode 6, and we were just howling with laughter. But at the same time, we were like, this works because this feels so real. Like that. I think the thing that has really made the show is Bill Hader's strived since episode 1 as being like, okay, this might be a ridiculous premise, but the whole thing, and he's talked about this too, is like, it doesn't matter what the genre is, drama or comedy. It's like, if we can make this thing feel real by making it feel as truthful as humanly possible, then people are naturally going to buy into it. And like, this is like the perfect example of that, because you get a scene like the motorcycle chase, you get a scene like the panther attack, which is told entirely in audio. You never see the panther at all. You get the scene like with the Gene interrogation, like with Janice's father and all that. Like, you get this raging of emotion where you can list off all these different scenes. And to a regular average audience, you would be like, how the fuck are they able to pull all of these off in one show? And they somehow do, and they make it seamless. And it all goes back to, like, again, I listened to Bill Hader was doing a recap show of his own show as well with Sean Fennessy of The Ringer. And every single season he was breaking down as like, yeah, the thing that I'm trying to go for is just like trying to be as truthful as possible to who these characters are and kind of everything that they would go through. Whether that's funny, it's funny. Whether or not, like, it's dark, it's dark. Like, that doesn't matter, It's like whatever the story calls for, that's what goes for it,
Well, one thing I will say is I totally agree. The show don't tell in this series is phenomenal. There is a moment where I was very fearful. I believe it was in the penultimate episode. I think it's Hank and something with the Chechnyans where it almost feels like we're going to get like a recap of everything they've been through, and then they quickly just cut to the point. And I'm like, that's filmmaking. We saw it was literally 3 episodes ago. We don't need to see these characters fill each other in. Just get to the point. And again, what is good filmmaking if not having a panther attack feel so real and so aggressive? And so I was so, when Hank is trying to pull that bar off.
Oh, forget all the rest of the stuff with Barry this season. This is the most tense I've been this entire season. Just watching, just all with facial acting.
I said
no words at all.
I said we can't lose Hank like this. No way. We don't even see anything. And then that's writing. And I think the reason the conversation right now is going in the way it is, we're three young writers here, and we're watching arguably one of. And again,
if not the best. I feel, again, I was talking with Eli, I talked with you about that. In between this and Better Call Saul, as far as like just the best examples of just forget everything else, just writing and storytelling and amazingly drawing out attention to an explosive climax, in both senses.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's so much to be learned from this show as like a student of film and a lover of film. And I think this show is everything that needs to break through right now, but we're in a great spot with television, and I just hope movies start to take to take place, because this show isn't expensive. The show isn't the most elaborate. I mean, they're quite literally using like motorbikes for that motorcycle chase scene that can't get over 60 miles an hour. Those are like cheaper vehicles. Those are like the like street bikes, you know? They're not like actual motorcycles. It's like, and that's the hilarity of it too. They're like dirt bikes meant for BMXing and stuff, but they're cheaper. Like the cost effectiveness of this show, all you really
Amazing.
you know, all you really need is just the talent and the writing to be bulletproof, like Barry is, apparently. Well, actually, maybe not Barry, more
Maybe
so
not Barry, but
maybe more so. I'm forgetting his name.
Fuches?
Fuches. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Fuches is the
Yeah.
bulletproof one. But I mean, it is just a masterclass, no pun intended, in like in just delivering on what you put on the page and just translating that to the screen. And I mean, yeah, what more can be said? If show don't tell is the only thing you get from film school, you could tell Bill Hader paid attention
Hell
for that
yeah,
lesson.
hell yeah.
Like, I mean, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for this next section, I want to kind of like break down like kind of where, because I mean, it's safe to say after Goran's death at the end of season 1, it's really 5 main characters we have. It's Barry, Sally, Fuches, Hank, and Jane, as far as that goes. Those are our 5 main characters we've been following. You know, we got like a lot of new characters this season as well, but I feel like it's those 5 characters. So for this next section, I want to break down kind of where each character started the season, where they ended, and kind of where we think they could go. Because naturally, Barry has not only been greenlit for season 4, which they also wrote all of during the pandemic when everything shut down at first, when they were right about to go into production into season 3. They wrote all of season 4 throughout the pandemic. Not only are they set to go into production, but Bill Hader is now directing every episode of season 4.
I saw that.
Which is mind blowing.
I was going to say that,
which is crazy to think that like as great as this season was, we're already like being set up for something even better in season 4. But
real quick, before we jump into this next topic, I just wanted to say, this is where I was going with that last segment. My favorite sequence and scene of the year so far comes from Barry. It's that sequence where we first get introduced with Sally and she's walking through the varying aspects of her set.
And
that
it's
was
just
phenomenally shot.
Phenomenally. And then at the end, you realize like, oh wow, like even someone who has it all might not have it perfect. And I love that as the sentiment of this season. And so for me, what you just told me, and this is the reason I wanted to bring it up about that, like writing COVID capsule. Oh man, if they had dedicated time to do this,
man,
I can't wait, dude. Like, I think it's going to be even
we
better.
saw this with like a bunch of different shows, a bunch of different showrunners. Like, you know, their shows got delayed, and I feel like another reason why a lot of these shows are coming back with such a strong returning season after the COVID period is like because we also saw this with the Duffer Brothers with Stranger Things season 4. Why we feel like this new season is so refreshing because they we got all that extra time to go back and look over the stuff and try and polish it up and make it even better because we had the time. And so like all the creators that were able to do that, kudos, because it really seems to have paid off. So obviously, you know, so let's start obviously with the star of the show, Bill Hader, Barry, you know. So we start off the show, Barry, you can tell, is in a much darker place than we left him, you know. After everything that went down in season 2, after losing Fuches again, he's in a much darker place. He's taking hits for hire, you know. Again, it starts with him capping both those people in the pit with the forgiving Jeff sequence. And Barry's whole thing this season seems to have been, he is on this hell-bent quest for forgiveness. He needs to be forgiven in any way, shape, or form, literally to the point where it is driving him to do things that we would have expected him, from the shouting sequence to Sally to literally driving Cousineau around in his trunk for a while. And I guess the thing that's so absolutely wild about his arc is the fact that for all the dastardly stuff that he does this season, I think this is probably the most despicable that he's been like since the beginning of the show. And this is already like he killed Janice Moss at the end of the first season, which I think was like the biggest mind-blowing thing. How they're able to bring that back around this season and tie that back in. But it's like, so this season, Barry has been constantly striving for this thing of forgiveness, but it's at the end, you know, it ends with him being arrested. You know, they finally figured it out. They managed to put all the pieces together. Barry is clearly responsible. So I guess in the thing of where my question for Barry is, do you think that Barry is capable of being redeemed at this point? Or do you think at this point he's just so far gone that because the thing that was so emulative about his performance is that Barry is at the point where he doesn't even realize just how evil he's gotten. Like, I feel like before there was some sense of a self-awareness, and that's why he was trying to get away from the life in the first place. But now, I don't know, man. I think Barry's just so far gone. I don't know if there's any coming back for him. But what is your guys' take on that?
I think a good host would let his guest take this one first. Eli, man, what's your take on this?
I completely agree. I think it's very much like a Walter White kind of case where I think at this point everything's come crashing down around him, and you just can't undo the past at this point. You can't fix it. It's unfixable. Even if obviously he's probably going to get out of prison, but I think the only way he can even kind of redeem himself is just by trying to right any wrongs that he might have been directly or indirectly responsible for. Like maybe Fuches has something in the works again, who knows? And pretty much just, maybe it'll come back around to him having to save Sally or something. I can see that being a pretty good option if they wanted to go that route. But it's just, oh man, honestly, at this point, no, I don't think I really can side with Barry at this point. I'm definitely more on Hank's side with everything, and yeah, but that's I just think it's phenomenal how we've gone from just seeing his evolution, his character, and just not just his character, every character. We've seen like pretty much everyone at like their lowest points this season, and it's been just incredible to just kind of see the writing. It just feels so natural.
Definitely. It definitely feels very like it just feels of this earth, It's that's the scary part about this show, really. I think there's a bunch of different ways you can sort of spin it. I think the Fuches going back to the Chechenian farm spinoff is personally something
Right?
I
I mean,
would watch.
I would watch a whole show based
Like-
off that. But
Like a Little House on the Prairie type thing. I don't know. But in all seriousness, I think, you could have Barry be behind bars and Bill Hader be behind the lens for a majority of the season. Really, Sally kind of embodies the darkness, right? Like it transfers over to her, and now we see her take center stage and battle her demons, and maybe Barry gives her some guidance behind bars. Like you have like that classic scene where she goes to visit him and he's just trying to not let her make the same mistakes he made. I mean, there's so many different demons that have now been let out of the bottle, and you can play with this thing in so many different ways. But personally, I think that we did see Barry's redemption arc. He tried, but he had no Fuches to rein him in and ground him, albeit Fuches did that in the wrong way. But without Sally being his rock, as she was too busy in production land trying to get Joplin off the ground, without Fuches giving him some sort of guidance, his redemption arc was more violent than anything someone who was sort of helping him through a situation ever could have portrayed, or ever could have, guided him to do. So I think it's beautiful how you could have another redemption arc, but I think we already got that, and we saw that as much as we love Barry, I think he is a monster. And I think he now is in the best place for him, which is behind bars. And I think maybe the best place for Bill Hader going forward is behind the lens. That's just what I think.
Well, see, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because when Bill Hader was on Bill Simmons' 1000th podcast episode a day ago in order to talk about it, Bill Simmons was just like, yeah, man, all I'm going to say is that season 4 of Barry is just like Barry behind bars. We kind of get like Oz starring Bill Hader. I'm like, I'd be all for that. And I'm like, oh man, that would be completely nuts as far as that goes. So transitioning it over to Sally. Sally too is in like, I think Sally has been, I think, kind of like really not underrated, but kind of like undervalued, I feel like, as a character, as an actor, because I feel like kind of going into the show, I'm not saying that she was like the least interested. She's like, okay, she's naturally going to be the meet cute. She's going to be the one that he falls for, and their relationship, I think, it's just been so antithetical and so completely like kind of deconstructive towards those type of relationships since the beginning, like very clearly it's like, okay, you think at first it's like, oh, so this is kind of like the origin of like how Walt and Skylar got together, and then it's kind of devolved into that. But no, like how they like kind of break open like her past and show, okay, she's got a little bit of darkness in her past, so it kind of like, again, like this season has been all about how Barry's darkness is just kind of infecting everyone in his life. And I feel like this season is definitely the biggest thing where Sally is kind of really starting to demonstrate that darkness now that she's fully enmeshed in the Hollywood system, now that she's she's gone through it all, she's gone through the ringer of getting her show off the ground, really actually finally getting to understand what the Hollywood system is like, having that like being in that fresh creative process, then like after the show is done, and then understanding like kind of how her world is just kind of broken apart when the show is ultimately ripped away from her between the algorithm stuff, the production stuff. It's like, oh, we wanted to meet these barriers, but it didn't quite check off these boxes. And that was clearly where Bill Hader was just going to town as far as lampooning Hollywood left and right. But the biggest thing I think that's established by the end of the season, and it's done very, very subtly, because the whole thing about Sally, specifically in those last 2 episodes, she comes this close to being able to do something like really, really crazy, right to the point where she stabs that one biker in the... I can't even describe how they were able to pull that off. That was nuts how they pulled that off. To beating the guy to death. And I'm like, holy shit. So this is how... Like, this is it. This has come full circle. Barry, like, it started right when Sally was kind of criticizing Barry for trying to be a little bit too aggro and a little bit too toxic masculine. And now Sally has completely become that, right to the point where when it ends with her, she is officially getting out of LA and going back to Missouri, where she's from, the origin of her trauma to begin with, and I don't know what's going to happen with her next season, but I definitely feel like we're in for something like even darker than we got with her. Like this to me was like the real beginning of like Sally's like descent, like, so I don't know. What's your guys' take on that?
Oh, I completely agree. I think just her kind of grasping with the fact she just committed a murder is also just going to send her spiraling down even further. And I'm just really excited to see where they take her. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
Yeah, I kind of hope you could change the name of this show from Barry to Sally going forward. I really do. I really do. I think she's been through so much. I think she is the most compelling character at this point in time to take a lead role, because I honestly think it's one of those Dominic Monaghan lost situations where it might be time for Barry to step back for the betterment of his show. And it's fine because Bill Hader is still going to be such a creatively driving force. Of course, still have him and maybe have him return to the lead. But I think for a season or two, while Bill Hader works out his demons and pays his dues a little bit, which I do think we need to see happen for Barry, I think it's perfectly fine, because I think you have Kusino stronger than he's ever been. And I know we'll talk about him in a few seconds here. You have Sally stronger than she's ever been. And what was the show in the first season? It was really the big three. It was the three of them. And so I think we can have those two characters carry this thing with Barry playing a more backseat, hopefully Oz type role. I think that'd be totally fine, because I think like good writing can supersede the original vision of a show, which is about this guy who's a hitman. But I think we've seen that now, and that story can be told again in a different way. But I think it's morphing and changing, and I think the beauty of the show is not living on the hill that they not dying on the hill that they started on, which was this one premise that hooked Eli and myself, as we said early on in this thing. Like initially we were charmed and delighted to watch a show with this premise, but it's growing and it's changing into something more. And I think it would be okay for Sally to take the reins. But I also think this is the type of show where whatever happens, it's probably going to be good. I mean,
Yeah.
I have little to no negatives to say. I will just say that I felt the only thing that was a little underutilized and a little lacking was the breakup between Barry and Sally, because we saw them go through so much to get together. And then for them just to split up in this way, it was, I mean, I know that Barry has always been her muse, and so like the stepping stool for her to make herself feel better. But I do think she still loved him to an extent. And so for them to kind of like step on that and not give me as much as what I thought was there, which I think is clearly there if you go back and watch those first two seasons, that felt a little thin. But I do believe there's a bigger plan here. So maybe now that Barry is taking the fall for her, she might realize and have like a change of heart or something. But if there is one gripe about Sally this season, I do think it's the fact that it was a little. Yes, I know she's got the opportunity of a lifetime. She's not only the star, she's the showrunner, she's the director. She has a big plate. But I think Barry being there for her every step of the way, it just didn't feel like the most organic way the relationship would go. And so that's like my only complaint about this season.
Only thing that I'll say to that point, and like I absolutely get where you're coming from, but the only thing that I will say to that point is, if anything, I think the thing that was so genius and on display about that is the fact that it's like, okay, so Sally, obviously you had the Elsie Fisher character who like saw Barry and hers relationship for the first time. That was like her first time seeing them together. And she's like, oh, this is like a little bit worrisome, so that was genius enough as it was. But I think the thing that's so brilliant about Barry and Sally's relationship, and why I think it was like the perfect crux of the season, despite the fact that they spent so little time actually on screen together, is because again, she has officially now become everything that she was criticizing him for. Like she was on about like the toxic masculine, about how like he was kind of like that kind of that abuser, but now she is now completed her transition from the abused to the abuser, because you see how she is with all of her assistants, you see how she is with the apology video. She has effectively become everything that she didn't want to. It's so crazy how they're able to pull that off, and like her breaking up with Barry to me was like that final transformation, even if we didn't realize it yet. And the other thing that I'll say too is that basically from what Bill Hader said from behind the scenes thing, I think that like, even though, again, we've got acting legends like Stephen Root and Henry Winkler on the show, and obviously everything that Anthony Harrigan does with NoHo Hank is amazing, but I think that Sarah Goldberg might be the best performer on the show, only because, like, there's so many complex and difficult shots that they have to do, where she is having to give such a variety of different complex emotions, and half the shit that they did with her, they get in one take. The scene where she's being strangled, one take. The scene with her confronting Darcy Carden in the elevator, one take. And I'm just blown away. Like, it goes all the way back to that monologue that she gave in season 2, and they got it in one. I'm like, how are they able to pull this off? Like, that's just the thing. Like, as a filmmaker, like my filmmaking brain just goes nuts. So
sounds like I got to listen to this podcast.
Oh my! I'm telling
You're
you,
gonna have to
so
link me
many
that.
more. It just made it that much more rich and interesting. So many different behind the scenes. So now let's transition over to Gene Henry Winkler. I mean, look, he's an acting legend. I was blown away by the fact that I'm like, wow, this shows already the power of the show, that they got Henry Winkler in such this crucial like kind of mentor role. And Gene has been kind of one of those like unsung heroes where I feel like Gene has never been one of the most popular characters on the show, but man, Gene went through the ringer this season. I'd make the argument to say that this is easily Henry Winkler's best performance on the show since its inception. And oh my God, I mean, from obviously we already knew that this was going to be a crazy season for Gene just based off of him finally finding out from Fuches last season that Barry was the one who killed Janice, you know? And so that was already going to create a crazy thing. And for them to already from the first episode where he immediately is like confronting Barry about Janice's death and how like Bill Hader was very, very apparent in the behind the scenes where it's like, okay, this season is going to start with Gene confronting Barry and it's going to end with Gene winning. So like Gene technically did get a victory at the end, but like at what cost? Because it's like he gets kidnapped by Barry, driven around in his car. His entire family is threatened, you know, to the point where Barry's stupid plan actually ends up working and his acting career is kind of rejuvenated. He ends up like all trying to like redeem and like start to like, you know, do all these makeups with all these people that he spurned throughout Hollywood history. Like you get a great Joe Mantegna insert kind of out of nowhere. I loved, what's his name? Fred Malamed, some small part as his agent, which was just great. And then the Laura San Giacomo character where she's just spouting all this different stuff that he's done in the past where it's like Barry is the one that is seeking redemption, but Gene is the one who actually does get the redemption because he's the one where even though you very, very understandably so understand why he is not trying to rat out Barry at all because of like he literally is worried. He's like, oh my God, this guy's like actually crazy. And like that moment between him and Barry at the end of episode 2, where he's in the house with his family after that chase and just like the super close-ups and just like how intense Barry. I'm like, oh my God, like it's like I'm like forget the fact that it's like Barry is literally like threatening Cousineau's like grandson as he's sitting right next to him. I'm like, this is only the second episode. I'm like, where are they gonna go from here? And just how it ended with him being confronted by Jim and kind of like it's almost like I feel like the idea that Gene still had to be forced and coerced into giving up Barry, despite the fact that it's what he wanted in the first place. And like he wanted to do right by Janice. He wanted to do the right thing. But it's the fact that he still had to be coerced into doing the right thing. I feel like that says so much about Gene's character. So it's like, what do you guys think of Gene's journey throughout this point? You know, kind of where he started versus where he is now. And like, what do you think that spells out for him in the future? You know, like, is the fact that he was ultimately forced to rat out Barry, is that going to come back and bite him in the ass in some way? You know, because like, it's crazy because even though he did the right thing, I think I'm more worried about Gene than I ever have been before.
No, I'd completely agree. I just think, just off topic slightly, but just that stare at the finale was so cold, and the grin. Oh my gosh, show don't
like
tell.
How
like we
Gene was
saying.
able to flip the tables back on Barry, where it's like he really had Barry believing that it's like, oh, he was, you know, he loved him and he was trying to like, you know, do right by him. It's like, you know, he's like, oh, he knows he's gonna get both of us. You know, he's like, he forced me to tell him, but then you realize it's like, nah, Gene wanted this. Even if he didn't seem like it, Gene wanted this, whether he was willing to realize it or not. And I'm like that. And I'm like, this is the reason why Henry Winkler is one of the best actors we have. You know, like going all the way back to Happy Days. It's like, man, I'm like, how crazy is that? Like Happy Days to now, like that blows my mind when I think about that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Barry was still the apprentice and Gene was the master. You know, it's
true.
It's great.
Which is even crazier because one episode earlier, you literally are like, oh man, Gene might not be as good of an actor as he thought, where he's trying to, defend Barry against Janice Moss's father, you know, the great Robert Wisdom, like how they managed to get him like Bonnie Culver from The Wire. And I'm like, how he's so like, yeah, he's a master interrogator. And how within 5 seconds of Gene trying to like defend Barry, he's easily able to figure out, it's like, oh, this guy knows something, you know, and like just how that leads to that interrogation scene. I'm like, oh my God. That one, I'm like, this show is no longer a comedy. Like
I think Gene played the role of a lifetime in putting away a killer who we had that amazing beach sort of overdose sequence where intercut throughout the episode where you quickly realize these are all of his victims standing on that beach with him.
I mean, I realized it as soon as you saw Goran and Chris, but like that's what I realized. I'm like, oh wow, yeah, like.
And just so well done, you know, like just to see how many people Barry has killed for a payday. Yeah, I think Gene played the role of a lifetime, but it's sad because I think, you know, like all good productions, when they come to an end, you're going to miss working with those people. And I do genuinely think that Gene enjoyed some of his time with Barry. Like, I do think he genuinely does love all of his students. And so that's why they keep making a point to say that throughout the entirety of this season in the masterclass, behind the scenes of the filmmaking of the masterclass. I do think Gene is a natural teacher and a natural caregiver at heart. And so I think Barry's failure and the fact that he couldn't save Barry and stop him from killing again, I really think that's what weighs on Gene the most. You know, he obviously holds the grudge of killing Detective Janet Moss, his love, his second love in life, which is, again, an amazing thing for that character to find love again so late in life. and to take that away from him is just such an amazing emotional driver. But I think the thing that Gene contributes the most is the sense of true realism. Um, just being a man who's flawed, being a man who has to repent and pay his dues, but just being also still good-hearted. And I think he does kind of feel like a failure. I think that stare at the end was a little bit of what you said, like, yeah, I wanted you to go down. But I also think he stands there and looks at him for so long, like he's like, I do think when he would call Barry son, I do think he genuinely viewed Barry as like a son, especially when he invites him to his cabin at the end of season 1. Like there's a real familial bond growing there. Um, and I think Gene takes it hard. I think his failure is not only in his career, but it's in Barry failing to walk the righteous path. And what is a student without, what is a teacher without the success of their student, you know? And I think Gene is just so brilliant in so many ways. And of course, being the legend that he is, just being able to encapsulate that role. Not many, I think, could do that. So,
not to mention that this might have been his most physically challenging yet. Like, he had to, like, go on a run. He was locked in a trunk for a while. Like, that scene where they shot him, like, when he was running and how he's getting attacked by all those dogs. And I'm like, the biggest, I think, complication that Gene had this season was the fact that it's like, he wanted Barry to go down so badly, but then he realizes that Barry's path of redemption was, like, working out, you know, where he's trying to be as genuine as possible to show Barry, but then he realizes like, I kind of owe a decent the other thing is like, I kind of owe a decent amount of where I am this season to Barry, because for better or for worse, his stupid plan works. So you're right, all those points that you were saying as far as like, you know, he really has developed this bond with Barry, and even though he's definitely only saying what he says in order to, like, you know, make sure that Barry doesn't kill his family, it's like he has developed somewhat of a bond.
well,
And I think
I hate to go there because the show is just so awful, but it's like Obi-Wan on Mustafar with Anakin. You know, even though he knows his student is too far gone.
That also brings up vibes of Kenobi. So, like, the less said about that, the better.
But even though Obi-Wan knows his student is so far gone, he still feels a love in his heart where he's willing to extend that hand to him before cutting off the hand.
I think it says something too, like where with that final shot of the whole season, like right after Barry gets arrested, like there was a very deliberate reason why he showed it, like from the inside of the house, staring out through the glass panel, where it's like Gene has that stare with, with Janice Moss's father and Jim Moss, and like there's this like understanding of it's like, you know, it's like, I know I did the right thing, but why does it not feel like I did the right thing? And I'm like, the fact that they were able to say that with no words, I'm like, just master class, pun intended,
powerful
you know, master class acting right there. I mean, just all the stupid other little inserts too, where it's like that. I mean, the filming of the masterclass too, just how awesome that was. The scenes with the agents and Joe Biden. I still can't get over that stupid freaking chase at the end of episode 2. I'm like, that's so good.
Can we talk about bringing theater to the movies?
Oh my god.
No, but seriously, Eli, man, anything to sort of what's your take on our whole talking about Kusano's arc throughout the season? I want to hear from you before we get too far away from it.
Well, I do think I feel like it was a deliberate choice kind of to make him kind of the only one who was kind of getting any good out of what was happening. I just feel like it was a really nice parallel to everything happening with like Barry and Sally and Fuches, and it was just really nice to see because, you know, he never really did anything wrong, and he was really just suffering and hurting for just so much stuff that he just was out of his control. And it's really nice to see that he finally got his good karma. And it's heartwarming, but it's also, you're also a little worried for him as to just what might be the repercussions of locking up Barry. And, you know, like we said, I think a lot of next season's going to be on the inner struggles of like a lot of characters and just coming to grips with what they've done, like Sally and Gene and obviously Barry. But it's been really cool to see, and I just the more I pick apart this show, the more I just realize how brilliantly it's written. It's absolutely
I think it's phenomenal. So fascinating that you bring that up too as well, because it's like, if anything, this season shows it's like, I mean, yeah, Gene never did wrong on this. It's like, yeah, he never killed anybody, but like this shows it's like, no, Gene's got dirt. Gene's got some skeletons in his closet. Like when Laura said Giacomo was going into all that stuff that he did to her in the past, it's like he's trying to think that he's like he's trying to get the easy forgiveness too, you know, maybe not for Barry and all that, but like that's the other thing too that makes his arc so satisfying and dead is this is the first time that he's really had to do something like really meaningful that actually like had, it's like, again, it's like, yeah, I did the right thing, but it's like, man, this had consequences. This is tough, and this is going to take a toll. Like this is not over. And he has that realization, and I think that's again what kind of sells it. So 2 more characters to break down. Hank. So the thing about Hank this season is that I think this is probably the most divorced that Hank has been from the entirety of the main plot. You know, the first 2 seasons kind of all revolved around the fact that like Hank was been an antagonist, he's been a protagonist to Barry. You know, Barry Barry is constantly conflicted with Hank, but he just loves Barry for whatever reason. He just thinks he's so cool, whatever reason. And the thing that's has been so interesting is that, like, we always talk about like the little angel and the devil as far as like the different sides of your consciousness. And what's been always so fascinating about Hank is I feel like simultaneously been both of those at one time. He's been both the angel that's kind of coaxing Barry in the right direction, but he's also been the devil that's like kind of provoking Barry with his worst deeds. Whereas like he constantly goes to Barry in order to get these jobs done that he needs to, but he's also kind of reminding Barry, like, well, I still will never forget that moment in last season where Barry's sitting with Hank at the curtain. He's like, Hank, am I a bad person? He's like, oh my God, you are the worst person. You are the absolute most worst person that I have ever known. I just goes into this whole monologue. And the thing that I think was so brilliant about Hank's usage this season, besides the whole relationship that just developed with Cristobal, where I'm like, okay, that makes sense. These two are like such good friends. They love each other so much. It's like, okay, why not just put them together? That just works so well. The repercussions that have with the Chechens versus the Bolivians and all that was just hilarious how that went. Where it's like, wow, of course. Leave it to a show like Barry to make the most traditionalist crime part of the show the funniest part about the show. I mean, Eli, that led to one of your favorite sequences with this, that one wide shot of just like, the one guy trying to take a video to send the Chechen bosses, then just like the cops and the rival Bolivia just showing up at the same time and just destroying everything, which was just amazing.
We're gonna have to rethink your role.
But the thing that I think that was so great about Hank is this is kind of like Hank's face turn, I believe, is the wrestling term that Pat was talking about.
Heel turn.
Like reverse face turn.
Oh, you're right.
He goes good this season. This is really Hank's like from the thing.
Well, he found love, man.
Yeah, well, so he fallen in love. He's trying to like actually make it. He's trying to like salvage his relationship against the face of all odds, and it's so great. Like what they did with Cristobal, like with the different people that kept coming in, where like they could have so easily like make it that traditional, where it's like, oh, Cristobal's got to play face against the family and all that, but like they don't go in any of the traditionalist directions with that. And what's so amazing is that Hank is ultimately, of all the people who like are trying to do good and trying to be forgiven and all that, I think that Hank is the only one that succeeds this season, because he's the one that's telling Barry, it's like, he kind of kicks off Barry's whole arc where it's like, look, forgiveness has to be earned. This isn't something that can just be given willy-nilly. And it shows that like Hank is the one that like really is the only one that understands like how to actually get forgiveness, because he understands it's like, look, the shit that we have to do in order to fight for the ones that we love and all that, the things that we care about is dangerous, and all that. Like he's trying to salvage the Chechen mob, but it, like he knows that Fuches is a bad guy, and he knows that Fuches needs to go down, but he's holding him because like, okay, he could still be benefit, because if the cops do find us, he can be the patsy and all that, and the things that he's willing to go through for Cristobal. And it's like, I think the thing that makes Hank work so well is it's the most traditionalist, but because Hank we've had this expectation of him throughout so long, where he's like, the colorful, quirky bad guy, it just makes like his earned moments feel so earned, where it's like he's essentially has to rescue his lover from undergoing reverse gay conversion therapy at the end, when his wife, who we didn't even know that Cristobal had a wife and a kid at the end, and how how he kills Cristobal's wife and is able to save him. Like, even though it sucks because Hank still wins, but like there's still that feeling at the end of where it's like, oh, this relationship between the two of them is never going to be the same, because you could just tell like, oh, something is up with Cristobal, like. So I don't know, what is your guys' thoughts on Hank this season as far as like, his usage rate throughout it with Barry? And also, can I just say too, that one episode in episode 6 where all of them are going to this one pastry shop, you just get that one stoner guy who's kind of like this muse and just like, giving them all different bits of advice. It's so good. Those are just like those brief comedy answers. I'm like, this is what separates the show from the rest. But like, I don't know, Hank this season, like, talk about it, guys.
Well, first of all, I think Bill Hader has lived in LA for too long, in the best way, in the best way possible, because that dude with the pastry shop was the most LA.
That was the most LA thing I think of everything in this show.
Yeah, for sure. But what a place, huh? Yeah, I think we needed Hank, because I think without Hank, this goes from being a slightly comedic, darkly emotional show to like just the most depressing, neo-realistic drama on air. I think we needed him, even in a more backseat role. But I also am worried that when he had that little blow dart go to his neck, I'm worried that there was a little double dream sequence going on, because the way that he just kills the wife, and the way that they have that Bolivian dancer in the Speedo.
Oh my God,
it was too eyes wide shut, and then he just becomes a virtuoso piano player as she like gets up in his face and like has him like touch her like maybe they did once in the past. I don't know. I think that there's I don't think this ending. I think there's to quote something that you love, Dom, I think there's more than meets the eye here.
There we go. See, now we're talking. Now you get it.
I also fear that maybe Barry's ending. I just don't know how real the last episode is, but that's because they've done such a good job that I don't know what reality is anymore, and I don't know what.
Yeah, this season is definitely the most surrealistic the entire show has been as well.
And that's what Hank does, and that's where I'm going with this. He roots us in reality because his love is pure, if not flawed, but it's pure, and it's a through line that we can understand. It is a little hard to relate to Bill Hader after a while, although they do an excellent job, but like none of us are hitmen. None of us have killed for hire. None of us understand the trauma that comes with that, the PTSD. But we can understand Hank, having a relationship and trying to make it work, whether it be friends, family, or with like a significant other. We've all gone through that in some way, shape, or form. And I think a show like this needs that. Again, though, I am fearful of how much was real in that penultimate and finale episode. We'll find out, though. We will. I do think a lot more of it is real than I'm leaving to believe, but the fact that I'm still thinking like that Panther sequence, did that happen, or was that a blow dart to the neck?
That
I don't know.
Panther sequence,
but
like I still can't get over that they pulled it off. Eli, so when you first met Hank, when you first started watching Barry, like was he instantly your favorite character, or you were like, oh no, I gotta wait for this guy to earn it a little bit, like just how he's changed and evolved from that first episode up until now?
Believe it or not, I think that very first scene when Fuches and Barry met him and the other Chechenians right at the start, I thought he was just kind of that kind of weirdly like over the top annoying side character, but I really grew to love him by the end of that first season, and now I think he's just my favorite character in the show. Just I absolutely love him.
Yeah, by the way, and obviously, like, I'm sorry, Jada Pinkett Smith, but like, what Anthony Carrigan's going on, that is real. Like, well, I don't remember what that disease is, where it's like, they're albino and like they slowly lose their hair over time.
Oh, alopecia.
Alopecia, yeah. I'm like, that is real alopecia right there. The fact that Anthony Carrigan just takes it in stride, and it's like, I don't know how he does it as far as how he's able to balance out. Just like, I mean, I wouldn't even say that he's ruthless at this part, but the fact that he does like constantly have to like play up the fact that he has to lead this ragtag group of Cheches who are effectively wiped out by Barry at the end of season 2, and the fact that he still is like super cool with Barry. But Eli, I mean, that sequence where he's just standing there as the guy is slowly taking out the blow dart and just blows it into his neck, and then he's like, oh yeah, I thought that you were gonna do that, but I just wanted to marry before he collapses up. Like, this is why Hank is the best. This is why Hank is the absolute best right here. So we're gonna wrap up talking about Fuches, and then we'll wrap up with our final thoughts on the show and kind of where maybe some theories as to where it's gonna go in the future. But Fuches, I think, has consistently been the most difficult character to get on board with, mostly because of the fact that for the majority of time, we felt like Fuches was kind of the guy that was like, again, the devil to Hank's angel as far as that goes, for lack of a better word. But I feel like this season in particular, Fuches has kind of become like plot protected, if that makes any sense, where he should have died so many different times, and it's very clear that like that Bill Hader likes working with Stephen Root so much, and that's why he's kind of kept him around. But I think the interesting thing about Fuches that's established this season is it's like Fuches is dependent on Barry, and just as much as Barry was like kind of dependent on him for those first 2 seasons, and how it's like his whole thing this season is like he just cannot let Barry go, and the fact that like he is so dependent on the fact that Barry needs to be happy with him, where when he finally calls Barry and he realizes that Barry is like happy without him, it's like something about that he just cannot let go, and how the fact of like, even though I don't think him and Barry had any face-to-face interaction time this season, and rightfully so, because if he had, Barry probably would have killed him, but the fact that he is still working so vehemently behind the scenes in order to undercut Barry, and the fact that it is still Fuches who ends up kind of getting Barry to where he is at the end of the season, because he's the one that sends the biker gang after him. He's the one that, right with the mom and her son, who were revealed to be the victims of Barry's first ever on-screen victim, and how that kind of doesn't go anywhere. But it's like, yeah, Fuches is still behind the scenes causing just as much of the damage as Barry is. Like, I wanted to get your guys' take on that before we wrapped up, because I definitely think that it's kind of become obvious that like Fuches as a character is a little bit pointless at this point, but like the fact that he's still doing this much damage behind the scenes and is actually still having this wide of repercussions. Like, what do you guys think about that?
I do think an exit from the show needs to happen soon, unless they can rewrite the importance of his character and role in the series. But also, I think the detective plotline needs to go away, and thankfully it still felt purposeful because of how entangled the detectives got with the whole is he the Raven, is he not the Raven debate. So I do think it served a purpose. Fuches clearly went from being a major A story player to a C story at best. So while I think Bill Hader's exit might be a refreshing revival to the show, or at least like a more reduced role as the character of Barry, obviously he can't fully go away, but I do think for him to be front row and center based off what happened at the end of this season just wouldn't make sense. But even if I think this is the one show to prove me wrong, but I just think right now, treating it like I would as a critic normally, I do think it would be a little illogical. I think Fuches, unless he has a revival of some sort, or they find like a new importance for this character. As much as I love him, and he's justified by being so amazing and being so perfect in his role, sticking around for this long, but you can tell the plot armor is there.
It's starting to show.
And
Well,
I think it's starting. All armor at some point breaks down.
You
It gets
find chinks in
rusted.
it 100%. But
Yes.
the only thing that I'll say to that is, what's so interesting about where Fuches ends the season is, even though he's like trying to get back at Barry, not for any good reason or nothing else, but only because he's just trying to sabotage Barry at every turn, and like he was able to escape, but like Fuches still ends up going to jail at the end of the season. Fuches still has to answer Fuches still has to answer. So it's like, I'm sorry, but like, only because, again, Bill Hader loves working with Stephen Root too much. It's like the likelihood of them meeting up in jail.
I know.
The odds are so astronomical, but like, what else could they do? Like, Barry
happen.
and Fuches are both in jail. It's gonna happen. Some sort of long dormant confrontation between the two is bound to happen next season. Where that's gonna go, I don't know. But
I just wish that he stayed on that farm in Chechnya. Then we call him back in 2 seasons after not hearing from him, and he's like the biggest crime lord in Chechnya. And then, like, you know what I mean? Like, I just wish something like that happened instead. But it's okay. I understand he is a part of the heart and soul and what makes this show tick. But Eli, what is your take on the whole Fuches scenario, the Fuches debate here?
Well, I agree. I think him and Barry's story is going to become intertwined again, most likely in prison. I feel like the writers are kind of indirectly telling us with all his narrow escapes from death that it's got to end with some giant showdown between the two. And I think it's
how he survived that shootout at the end of season 2 is I'm still questioning that to this day. Like,
he's a Marvel character.
Exactly. Because he has to. He's like a parasite. He's just going to keep coming back.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. 100%. And like the fact that it's like because when they started, like, Fuches' relationship with Barry was so one-sided, where very much we could tell that like Fuches was manipulating Barry so much, but like how they somehow managed to turn that around and bring that around, where it's like, no, but Fuches is just being just as infected by Barry as he has infected Barry. It's like that kind of like symbiotic relationship that the two of them developed. I think it's masterful. And again, the two had no on-screen time together at all this season. Like how Fuches is still around and still is unable to get away from Barry just as much as Barry is unable to get away from him. I think they brought that back around in season 2. And while I will say their relationship this season was probably the weakest element, like how they were able to bring that back around and where it's going to go for season 4, like I cannot wait. So like
it's sad because the only functioning relationship Barry has is the one with Fuches, which is the most detrimental to who he was.
Because that's the thing where they get into it. Like after he got out of the army and like effectively had no direction in life, Fuches was the one that came in. And like that was the thing that like made Fuches' interaction with Albert so like crazy. And like even though we didn't talk about Albert at all this season, the fact of how they were able to bring that plot line around and intersect it, where it's like these two different kind of core elements of Barry, where even though he saved Albert's life, he still did a terrible thing. And then now Fuches was being like, look, I saw a guy who like had all of this like pent up darkness and he just needed a direction to aim. Like I gave that to him. But like I'm like, that's so fucked up, but it makes sense so much. I'm like,
yeah, Albert's here to stay. Albert is he is one of the best expository devices I've seen in such a long time.
So
but just to call him that,
agree.
see, this is where this show rises above the rest. Yes, that is one of his purposes, but he also adds so much to the show as a character as well, that's where this show functions on all cylinders. Because yeah, you need him to sort of like, paint the background of Barry, and we know that guy survived, but now we get to meet him and we get to see like there is some good in Barry. Like even at his lowest, this guy doesn't kill him. He doesn't turn him in. He lets him go to try and see redemption because he's thankful to this heinous man. But he also serves as an expositor. I mean, this show is just incredible.
The only thing that I'll say to that, and this is probably my only nitpick, and this is the last thing I want to ask you guys before we get into final thoughts, before we wrap up and get out of here. The only nitpick that I had of this entire 8 episodes, like I said, almost all 8 of these episodes were completely masterful from start to finish. And I wanted to ask you this, Chris. I know I asked you this before the podcast started. Eli, I'm going to ask you this right now. Did Albert let Barry off too easily? Because the thing about it is that Albert's reintroduction into the show was so interesting as far as it's like, he's introduced as like the guy that Barry saved, even though Barry committed like his first heinous act in the army when he went after that person in order to try and avenge Albert because he just like couldn't let that go. But then he ended up killing this innocent person, which is why he received the dishonorable discharge. And Albert is introduced as like this FBI agent who's kind of like hellbent on finding out who is committing all these murders because it may or may not have tied back to Barry. And it's very clear that like there may have been something else that happened from that sequence that we didn't know about, where Albert has clearly got this vendetta and he's clearly way smarter than all the cops, and he's just this close to figuring out that it's Barry. And he finally gets the final confirmation that he needs from Fuches. And that ending of episode 7, you're like, okay, this is very clearly being set up for this finale. But I don't know, there was something about the fact that Albert kind of let him off the way that he did, and the fact that it had to be Janice Moss's father, who very understandably had a reason for wanting to take Barry down, that let Barry off versus that took down Barry versus Albert. There was something about that just rubbed me the wrong way. I'm like, obviously it was a thing of where like this relationship was still so new that they were still trying to figure that out. But I don't know. I wanted to get your guys' take on that as far as, did Albert let Barry off too easily in that one sequence, you know?
I guess now that you bring it up, I think it maybe could have benefited from being like a minute or two longer, maybe just going a little more in depth, maybe like wouldn't hurt to strengthen the relationship a little more. And even then, maybe if he had maybe gone the route and like teamed up with Janice's father, maybe it would have been like even a bigger payoff. Like, oh man, like all these different like areas of his life they're all coming back to just bite him. And it shows that just no matter where he goes, he's just bringing evil with him.
Especially because it seemed like Albert and Jim seemed to be like the perfect team up pair as far as that goes. Like they all both had like different set skills that complemented each other. Especially because the biggest thing for me as far as how Albert didn't give a shit about any one of Barry's other victims. He didn't care about the Chechens. He didn't care about. He really didn't have that much investment in Janice Moss. If we're being
He's on his own
honest,
path.
His whole thing was he was trying to figure out what happened to Chris, because the whole thing that establishes that Barry, Chris, and Albert were like this tight unit, and he's like, Chris died in such this weird way that didn't seem to make any sense at all.
And they were there for each other in Afghanistan.
Exactly, like that's the thing that was tying it together. And like it's the fact that he specifically wanted Barry because he kind of figured out like Barry killed Chris, and he wanted to figure out why, and like he didn't get that conclusion, he didn't get that closure, and Barry's just like breaks out like a child and he just lets him off. And I'm like, it's like, what is it like? So subconsciously he's like, oh, so Barry, all the other heinous shit that he did is like, oh, Barry couldn't have killed Chris. And it's like almost in his mind, he's like, okay, I'm more willing to accept that Fuches is a liar and wants to see Barry go down rather than believing that Barry would actually do something like this, despite the fact that it's like so completely in the opposite direction, where he literally is seeing Barry next to a hole with a body in it, where he's like, he so clearly knows that Barry is capable of this, It's like something about that just didn't click for me,
Totally, man. And it speaks to so many, like, that's why I said he's a great expository device, but he's so much more than that, because he speaks to the strength of brothers in arms, right? Like, how could a group of people who were there for each other in the lowest, darkest moments, at least of his life, right? We know Barry's gone on to see crazier stuff.
Albert was literally shot in the face and like minutes away from dying.
And he's wondering, how could you turn on someone who was the only person we had in a moment where we all face death? And it is such a compelling, strong plot line. But I think that speaks to the brilliance of this show. Like, we even have the biker gang, and their connection is Taylor in season 1. Not a good guy, but that's his sister. Family is family, regardless of the mistakes you make. And so she comes for Barry. Everything comes full circle. So while I agree with you, Dom, I do think it was a little thin. I do think that some justice should have been served. I do think his personal vendetta did get in the way a little bit. Maybe not vendetta, maybe his personal appreciation. And I think he's such a good-natured person, and he doesn't have all the details on who Barry is. But I also think I agree with Eli a little bit, where we're not seeing the end of this. I do think it's going to pay off. Like, I do think that, yes, he got off a little easy, Barry, from this character, the FBI agent. But if there's any show I trust, and I don't trust many, Eli, just so you know.
Understandably,
considering
how many shows have let us down in the past.
Really, since Marvel became the biggest thing in the world, nothing's sacred. All the old rules have been rewritten for marketing campaigns,
right? And for the streaming age and all that, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I figured you were on the same page.
Oh, trust me, Eli, what are your thoughts on Marvel and Star Wars' this new content now, as far as Disney Plus's approach to them? Just let Chris in on that for now. What you've told me about them.
We're gonna need another hour, I think.
I think I already get the idea, but just because this is our first time talking, I just wanted to lay that out there, and I figured we were amongst good company. But I do think if there's any show I trust, I'm willing to just sit back and enjoy the ride, no matter how fucked up it gets with this show, because I do think there's a plan for all of these characters, even Fuches, who can probably have a piano dropped on him in the most old school Hollywood way and survive. So, he
would literally be the freaking, what is it, the evil judge that Christopher Lloyd played from Who Framed Roger Rabbit would literally have a piano dropped on him and he just come back as a cartoon or something like that.
Yeah, so I think there's a plan for it all. And I think that this moment, I do agree, Dom, in the present day, it is a bit questionable considering how amazing everything was. I think the larger scale, the bigger picture, I think we're in good hands.
100%.
Which is so scary to say, because we're in the hands of a hitman, mastermind, murderer.
Oh my God! But hey, think about it this way: we're in Bill Hader's hands, not necessarily Barry hands. So before we wrap up and get out of here, the only thing I want from all of you guys: final thoughts, star ratings, then maybe 1 or 2 predictions for where we could potentially go next season. Eli is the guest. I'm going to start with you.
I mean, if this isn't 5 stars, then it's very close to it. I have pretty much no problems with this new season or just the show in general. I think it's absolutely amazing, and it's definitely creeped its way into my top 10, maybe top 5, like I've ever seen. And man, theories, theories, theories. I definitely think Barry and Fuchs are going to meet up in prison, and I don't know if that will happen, but what maybe something I would like to see that I think could be a satisfying payoff is maybe Barry finding out what Fuchs really did, and then doing the same thing to him, maybe getting people that all these enemies that Fuchs has made along the way and getting them to, team up and come after him. I think would be a
Ooh, I
great
like
way to kind
that.
of end that.
I like that. Good
Yeah.
shit. This is why I keep having you back. You're able to come up with stuff where I'm like, yeah, I would think to go there because let me tell you something. Eli was the one that called that, like, yeah, that car crash, like, oh, something could come from that, and then they did absolutely nothing from it, because
Yeah,
oh
that was
man,
when I assumed the show was gonna be good.
yeah,
Yes,
look, the less said about Ozark, the better. We're past that. That was months ago. Chris, your final thoughts, star rating, and one or potentially one theory about where Barry could go for season 4 and potentially beyond. Because I'm sorry, like, Barry is one of the few shows where I'm like, this could go a season 5, a season 6. I'm like, logistically, it's probably not a good idea if the show goes on that long, but just because of how good the show is,
Yeah, for sure. I think as long as they have something to say, which is what the biggest thing the show has going for it, it just doesn't feel like cannon fodder, right? It feels like there's something tangible there, something actual that is, worthy of the viewership. I think as long as they have that still, then go on for as long as you want. I think this is the first 5 stars I'm going to throw out this whole year, and let it be with Barry. Yeah, 5-star season, amazing, and a 5-star show. I cannot wait for more. I'm very excited to see where next season goes. And I will say this: I think I already kind of pitched my theory. I don't know how much actually happened in the penultimate and finale episode. I think there was a lot of overdosing and a lot of blow dart sort of dream sequence scenario. And I think this show has always had an amazing line blur when it comes to what's happening in reality versus what's happening in the inner conscious, the inner psyche. And so I am just going to go into next season and accept whatever's given to me, but I'm going to question the whole time what's reality and what isn't.
100%. Yeah. So
like
as far
that.
as like my final thoughts on this, I mean, if this isn't, as far as I'm concerned, I said this at the beginning of the show, and as far as I go, I know we still have a couple more good shows to watch. Like I said, we're in the middle of The Boys right now. For All Mankind just came back. Physical came back. A lot of our favorite shows came back. But as far as I'm concerned, all of the TV for the year could pack it up and go home because Barry just blew. Barry was like the perfect cap off to this great like kind of streak of TV that we've gotten since Succession came back last fall. And as far as I'm concerned, like it just blew literally everything out of the water. All puns intended. Like this is the best thing on TV right now. I think every other show right now should strive to do what this show is doing. Bill Hader, man, from his start to his finish, I can't wait to see what he does next. I really hope that this isn't his apex creatively because I think this is showing to show. Like, I think as far as like, I'm going to make this bold statement right now. And I think that Bill Hader is the best comedian turned just like, not even just dramatic actor, just auteur in general that I think we've seen since Robin Williams. I'm making that claim right now. Whereas like, yeah, as far as like just comedians that have been able to make the jump to just full on having that like hitting all the broad range of spectrums. He directs, he acts, he's perfectly dramatic, he's hilarious, he's tragic, all those different things. I think Bill Hader is the perfect encapsulation right now. This is a 5-star season of television. This is a 5-star show. This is slowly making its way up to like one of my favorite shows of all time. And as far as where this could go next season, biggest thing was that I want to see, Barry meeting up with Fuchs in jail, seeing where that could go. I want more Albert. I want more Robert Wisdom's character. I want to see where Gene goes as far as like, potentially like how he's going to suffer the repercussions emotionally as far as his actions that he did in season 3. The biggest thing for me, I want to see what's going to happen with Sally when she goes back to Missouri. I want to see like how she's going to confront like kind of the root of her trauma. I want to see like potentially some of the other figures. She talked about having a toxic relationship in the past. I want to see kind of where that goes, like how much that toxicity came from her more so than like how she was portraying it. I can't wait. I'm like, I need the 4th season tomorrow so badly, but at the same time, I also need the anticipation to build up until next season. So with that being said, that's a review. That's our recap of Barry season 3. We did it. We crushed it, guys. Like, oh man, like if this might be like podcast of the year so far. Eli, like imaginary fist bump through the screen. Thanks for coming through. This was such a blast from start to finish. Eli, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
If you want to follow me, I have an Instagram. That's about it. But if you want to just see what's up, I post like once a year. I my handle is E_Holicky 45. That's E_HOLICKY 45 on Instagram. And yeah, give me a follow. Maybe shoot me a DM. I always like talking to people. So yeah.
Of course, and be sure to follow everything we've got going on at the official Talkin' TV podcast, as you can see in the handle right down below. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. We've got new TikToks coming out pretty much all the time now. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch if you're listening to us on any one of those platforms this morning. Chris, where can they follow you?
Yeah, you guys can find me as on Instagram as well as Eli, Facebook, Twitter at Christian Evanko. Evanko spelled Evanko. I make music, I podcast, and I post pictures of things like everyone else in the world. So you don't want to miss it. It's I've been told it's premium content for a free subscription level, and I'll say that again. It's premium content on a free subscription tier, and you guys don't want to miss that. At Christian Evanko, please follow me, and of course, the one, the only, the sarcastic master, if you will, Dominic Rizzi. Where can they find you?
I know I haven't been posting as much on Facebook just because I have been trying to limit my social media interaction, but you can still follow me across all platforms at Movie Nerd Reviews. I just posted my review of the new Netflix movie Spiderhead on my Letterboxd. You guys can go be sure to check it out right there at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. And from myself, from Chris, from Eli, this might not be the last time you see this trio. 12 scenes in a short film. And watch more fucking movies, but in this case, just great TV and great storytelling in general. We'll see you guys next time.